Hi class, Mrs. Calvi here. Quick review on converting decimals and fractions. So I'm going to start with first converting a decimal to a fraction. So I have the decimal 0.15 here. And what you want to do is you want to say the decimal using place value. And then what you hear is what you're going to write in either fraction form or mixed number form, depending on what your decimal is. So here you would say this as 15 hundredths. So I'm going to write exactly what I just said, 15 hundredths. Now remember, this 5 is in the hundredths place. So the last digit tells you what place value. Now I can also simplify this down. So even though this reads 15 hundredths, you should always put it in simplified form. So we know based on our divisibility rules, if a number ends in a 5 or 0, they are both divisible by 5. So if I were to divide both the numerator and the denominator by 5, I would end up getting 15 divided by 5 equals 3, and 100 divided by 5 equals 5, and my simplified answer is 3/5. So converting this decimal into fraction form would be 3/5 simplified down. Okay, now let's say I had a different decimal. So let's say I had 2.6. I'm going to say this decimal using place value, and that is 2 and 6/10. So I'm going to write exactly what I heard, 2 and 6/10. So this creates a mixed number. But I also want to make sure that I have a simplified mixed number. If I'm just looking at my fraction part, 6/10, I can simplify that down. Both 6 and 10 are divisible by 2. So if I were to divide that numerator and denominator, now one thing students forget to do is carry over the whole number. So carry over the whole number first so you don't forget about it. And then I'm going to divide both the numerator and denominator by 2. 6 divided by 2 gives me 3. 10 divided by 2 gives me 5. So here I would get a final answer of 2 and 3/5. So 2 and 6/10 as a decimal becomes 2 and 3/5 as a mixed number simplified all the way down. All right, so you always want to make sure you're looking at the fraction part of your mixed number to look to see if that can get simplified further. All right, so now let's look at fractions and mixed numbers and converting them into decimal form. So here I have the fraction 1/8, and I want to change my fraction into a decimal. So whenever I change a fraction into a decimal, I'm going to take my numerator, divide it by my denominator. So my numerator always goes inside of my division box, okay? Numerator always on the inside. All right, so now I'm looking at, well, 8 cannot go into 1, right? Goes in 0 times. I now need to add a decimal and a 0 to continue working. Add a decimal, add a 0, bring up my decimal right away so I don't forget about it in my answer. So now I'm looking at 8 going into 10. 8 goes into 10 one time. 1 times 8 is 8. 10 minus 8 is 2. I'm going to keep going, so I'm going to add a 0, bring it down. 8 goes into 20 how many times without going over? Well, 8 goes into 22 times. 2 times 8 is 16. 20 minus 16 is 4. Now, I usually say go out 2 decimal places, but I know, I can tell by looking at this, if I were to add another 0, I know that 8 can go into 40 evenly. So I'm going to go out 1 more decimal place. So 8 goes into 40 exactly 5 times. 5 times 8 is 40, and I come down to 0. So 1/8 is equivalent to 0.125, or if we were saying that properly, 1/8 is equivalent to 125 thousandths. Okay? Now let's say we had a mixed number that we wanted to change into decimal form. Okay, so here we have 3 and 2/10. So I want to change this into decimal form. So kind of easy, this one. I'm going to listen to how I read this, 3 and 2/10. 3 and 2/10. I happen to know that this is the tenths place. So this one was pretty simple just by looking at it. But let's say you can't really listen to what you say and write it. This is what we're going to do. We are going to take the fraction part and we're going to take the numerator divided by the denominator, just as we did before. So 2 divided by 10. Numerator always goes inside of my division box. Well, 10 cannot go into 2. It goes in 0 times. I'm going to add a decimal and a 0, bring my decimal right up. 10 goes into 20 exactly 2 times. 2 times 10 is 20. I'm down to 0. So now this, the 2/10, is equivalent to 0.2. Common mistake students make is they forget about the whole number. So you just have to remember, you take the whole number and then you just add the 2/10 part. So this technically, this 0 is this 3. Okay? So let's say we had this mixed number and we wanted to put it in decimal form, 2 7/8. This one is not as easy. We don't know what 7/8 is as a decimal. So in this case, we're going to have to actually do the division to figure this one out. So we're going to take 7, we are going to divide it by 8. Don't forget, numerator always goes inside our division box. 8 goes into 7 0 times. I'm going to add a decimal and a 0, bring my decimal right up. Now I'm looking at 8 going into 70. How many times without going over? Well, 8 goes into 70 8 times. 8 times 8 is 64. I'm left with 6. I'm going to keep on going by adding another 0, bringing it down. 8 goes into 60 7 times. 7 times 8 is 56. I'm left with 4. Now I know if I add another 0 here and bring it down, I know that 8 will go into 40 evenly. So I'm going to add that extra 0. 8 goes into 40 exactly 5 times. 5 times 8 is 40, and I come down to 0. So just the fraction part, the 7/8, is equivalent to 0.875 or 875 thousandths. Remember, one thing students forget is to make sure you include that whole number 2. So 2 7/8 written as a decimal is 2 875 thousandths. Okay? Now, one thing I want to talk about is repeating decimals and decimals that end or stop, which we say terminate. So let's say I had the fraction 3/4. Well, this is one of those fractions we should know the decimal equivalent right away. We should know that that is equivalent to 0.75. Now, this decimal is said to terminate. That means it stops. It does not keep going. If we were to actually do the division, it stops at the 5. There isn't any further to go. So that's a terminating decimal. Now, we also have what we call repeating decimals, a number that continues repeating when you do the division. So one of those is 1/3. So if I were to take that fraction and turn that into a decimal, and I were to actually do the division, 1 divided by 3, 3 cannot go into 1, goes in 0 times, add my decimal and my 0, bring up my decimal. 3 goes into 10 3 times, 3 times 3 is 9. I'm left with 1. If I keep adding zeros, the same thing keeps happening. 3 goes into 10 3 times, right? At 9, I'm left with 1. Even if I add another 0, this keeps on going. So this is considered a repeating fraction or decimal, right? So I would write this as 0.3 with the repeating symbol above the 3. The repeating symbol only goes above the number that repeats. So this 3 continues to repeat. So let's do an example where there's more than one number and only one of the digits repeats. So here I have 1/6. So let's say I want to get that into decimal form. So 1 divided by 6. 6 goes into 1 0 times, add a decimal, add a 0, bring up my decimal. 6 goes into 10 once. 1 times 6 is 6. 10 minus 6 is 4. I'm going to add a 0 and I'm going to bring it down. Well, 6 goes into 40 6 times at 36. 6 times 6 is 36. I'm left with 4. So now here, if I add another 0, what's going to keep happening? Now my 6 is going to be repeating continuously, right? So here my answer would be 0.16, and the repeating symbol only goes above the 6 because the 6 repeats. It should not go above the 1 and the 6. It only goes above the 6 because the 6 repeats. Now, if I did this and I put the line above both of them, that's telling me that the 1, 6 repeats. That means your answer would be 0.161616. That's not the case here. Only the 6 is repeating. So the repeating symbol only goes above the number or numbers that continually repeat. Okay? Okay, so here we have 3/8, 29/100, and 1/9. And the directions are to put these in order from least to greatest. The easiest thing to do is to change them all into decimal form. So I want to change 3/8 into decimal form. And this is where you can use your calculator to do this. If you do 3 divided by 8 in the calculator, you end up getting 0.375. Okay. I also want to change my 1/9. So if I do 1 divided by 9 in the calculator, I get 0.1 with the 1 repeating. Now it makes it much easier to compare decimals for order from least to greatest. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write them on the side here, lining them up. So I have 0.375, I have 0.29, and I have 0.1 repeating. So looking at the decimal form, least to greatest, I'm looking at my whole number first. I can't tell, they're all zeros. Tenths, 3/10, 2/10, 1/10. Well, this one is the smallest, so this would be the least number. Then 2 would be next, and then the 3 would be last. Now, one important thing you have to remember, when you have to put these in order from least to greatest, you're using the information they actually gave you initially. You're not putting the decimal that you converted the fraction into. So I have to make sure these numbers go in order. So the 0.1 repeating, that was actually the 1/9. So this is going to be number 1. Number 2 was the decimal that they gave us. And number 3, the 375 thousandths, was the 3/8. So this would be 3. So when you actually go to list these in order from least to greatest, you would put 1/9, 29/100 as a decimal, and then 3/8 the fraction. So you are not putting what you converted them into. You're not including those in your final answer. All right? Okay, one last thing I want to go over, and that is comparing fractions and decimals. So here we're comparing 5/8 to 0.5 or 5/10. So in order to compare these, you're going to either want them both in decimal form or both in fraction form, okay? Well, I can easily put this into fraction form, and I know if I just read this, it says 5/10. So then that would mean that this is, in fraction form, this is 5/10. So now if I am comparing 5/8 to 5/10, I can cross multiply to see which is larger or smaller. Cross multiply. 8 times 5 gives me 40. And then I'm going to cross multiply in the other direction. 10 times 5 gives me 50. Well, I know that 50 is greater than 40. So then that tells me 5/8 is greater than 5/10. So in my original, what I was comparing originally, 5/8 is going to be greater than 0.5. So this was me changing both of them to be fractions. Now let's say I wanted them to both be decimals. I can do that also. So if I make them both decimals, so we were comparing 5/8 to 0.5. Now if I want to change this into decimal form, I'm doing division. You could do this part in your calculator, okay? So 8 goes into 5 0 times, add a decimal, add a 0, bring up your decimal. 8 goes into 50 6 times without going over. 6 times 8 is 48. and I'm left with 2. I can actually stop there because I know that this is equivalent to at least 0.6. And I know that 0.6 is greater than 0.5. So you can either change them both into decimal form or both into fraction form. All right, that is it for today, and I will talk to you guys soon.